Hello and welcome to Kalam Podcast, recording from Ramallah on the occupied West Bank in Palestine. We're sitting in Sardab studio, and today we have with us Inas Abdelrazik, who is the co-director of the PIPD, which is the Palestinian Institute for Public Diplomacy. Inas, welcome to Kalam Podcast. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Hi, Edgar. Thank you. Good to be with you.
So, do you want to just explain what the PIPD is, and what it does to those who don't know?
Yeah, so we are an independent, non-governmental association, NGO. What we're mainly focusing on is basically trying to build up citizens' diplomacy. So building Palestinian international impact towards liberation. So our main mission is obviously we're looking at decolonizing Palestine and liberation. And we think that we need to strengthen basically our advocacy and lobbying capacity internationally.
And you also have a presence on social media, but there you're not called PIPD, in case people would like to follow you.
Yes, we are called Rabit on social media. And we decided to, give that name because I think PIPD sounds very institutional. Many people also were asking us if we're related to the PA, which we're not. So
Right.
I think Rabit is more also, it really is about our identity to connect, network, and really make these connections meaningful for Palestinians.
Yeah. This kind of advocacy work, obviously, it's difficult in any situation, especially when you're representing a non-state actor, which Palestine is. It's not a state that's it's recognized by a few countries, but it's still not. It's an occupied territory. But since 7th of October, I can imagine that the working conditions have changed dramatically. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you face?
Yeah, obviously we live in, I think, unprecedented times for the Palestinians. We grow up, our generation, learning about our parents and grandparents' exile in 1948 is when my family was expelled from Palestine. I think right now, it's probably even of a worst moment, especially for people in Gaza. And what we are doing in terms of, our engagement was relevant before October, is even more relevant after October. So we're all, us as an organization and our partners, operating in emergency mode. But I think somehow we have seen that the past 5-6 years, so we're not an old organization, we're like 6 years old.
Yeah.
And the past 6 years, we have built something that has allowed us to continue being steadfast during this period, in terms of making sure we have built some connections, we have built some credibility, we have built some alliances, we have built some solidarity. We have built also among Palestinians a stronger way of being organized. Because I think as Palestinians now, especially since 2021, when there was the Sheikh Jarrah uprising and uprising all over Palestine, since then, I think we've seen that there is a lot of good Palestinian voices, spokespeople, people who are out there, who are either have a social media presence, a presence on the ground, on the media. So our voice is out there. I think what's still, work in progress, and what we're working for is how do we organize that energy? How do we organize and support also our people who cannot speak for themselves? How do we really organize our efforts in a way that, can really make an impact? And the impact we need is clear, is we need to isolate Israel worldwide.
I was about to ask, how is that going? But maybe I can phrase the question a little more specifically. How's the outreach going to the Western world? Because obviously, on October 7th and October 8th and October 9th, there was kind of this frenzy of anti-Palestinian sentiment, I think. Now, during the spring and maybe the past 2-3 months, the tide has turned somewhat. But how, you mentioned you had built up alliances and you had built up this kind of trust. How was it to try to convince people to keep caring about the Palestinian cause when the 7th of October had just happened?
So I think the theory of change has evolved a bit in a way that how do we make change happen? since October, we have geared our efforts differently, and that's also work in progress. Why? Because in the West right now, you clearly have a generational gap. You have the Gen Z, like the younger 18 to 25 years old, who are with us. And I think they give us hope. And these are the people, the grassroots, who we can build alliances with, who we need to empower so that, they will be in power one day. And I think we can see it through the US campuses, encampments, and the European encampments, all of that. That is happening organically, but also because they're a generation that's just better at being engaged, much more than when we were at university. And so I think that's a realization that, one, we need to stop trying to convince the current governments and the current people in power to support us. They won't. And if they do, they don't really. They will maybe say, okay, well, I will recognize Palestine, but that will be a symbolic gesture, and they will continue to sell weapons and trade with Israel. So we kind of moved away from advocating directly policymakers in the West, because it's really useless, or it doesn't build the change we need. The change is built from the bottom up right now, which is the younger generations, the public opinion, and really some thought leaders. After October, we've been speaking with celebrities and some art sector people who really, they have their heart in the right place. They just don't know what to say. They're afraid of speaking.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the work we do behind the scenes. It's also, how can we empower people who don't necessarily know how to speak, when, through which platform, and what kind of protection mechanisms they can have so that they can be really building their solidarity. But in the global South, I think there is a shifting dynamic in the world, right? We have a global majority, also called the global South, of countries who are the majority of the world. Mm-hmm. And they are putting on notice the North, the West. And I think it's like, I think Gaza and Palestine at the moment, the genocide, the ongoing Nakba on our people, has become sort of a litmus test of who is really for a world with international justice, rights and decolonization, and who is not. And what South Africa has done at the ICJ, what countries are doing, taking steps in, like Colombia cutting their coal trade with Israel, Chile, who has tightened or like sort of severe diplomatic ties, and expelled Israel from a major arms fair. These kind of things are creating precedents, and they are shaming the North to, again, applying major double standards, and basically just, they don't really give a damn about international law. It's really about their own interest. And so I think that dynamic, we are building more efforts to be able to change and have like victories and power shifting in the countries like Brazil, Colombia, Chile, South Africa, these countries and more, where actually they can take decisions that are really impactful for us at the moment. Again, with the emergency that needs to happen, which is obviously a permanent ceasefire and end to at least the really horrible genocide ongoing.
Yeah. I definitely want to get back to the way in which you're trying to affect change in the global South and the majority of the world, like you said. Sometimes people forget that. But I'm also interested in I want to hear you speak a little bit about the opinion polls that you've conducted and what they show specifically, because I know I've taken part of them in Kalam podcast. We've kind of it's kind of bolstered our raison d'être in terms of like why we exist, especially in the Swedish context, because you would see that a lot of the Gen Z Gen Z generation just off the bat, just kind of like by default support Palestine. They feel like they should, but then a majority of them hadn't heard of the term apartheid before, didn't know what colonialism meant. So can you speak a little bit about, like, I guess the kind of things that uh, maybe sound positive to anyone who supports the Palestinian cause, and the things that are a bit more challenging in terms of the polling that you've done in the West?
Yeah, so with the polling we conducted one last year that we didn't publish, and one this year we published.
Mm-hmm.
What the comparison shows is actually in the overall population, there was not such a shift in the public opinion. My instinct was that the shift in public opinion in Europe would have changed more. We conducted the polling in Italy, Sweden, Germany, France, and Belgium, with obviously very wide differences when it comes to these countries as well. So in Belgium, the vast majority of the population is actually really supportive of Palestinian rights.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's not the case in France or Germany, for example.
And you didn't expect this was surprising to you?
No, it was not that surprising, but I think it's important to note because we cannot just generalize in terms of Europe.
Yeah, sure.
So the dynamics are very clear, though, generationally, as you say. The 1824 and sometimes 1835, I mean, clearly there is a huge support that is much clearer than the older generation.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also more ready to take action. They also get their information elsewhere. So while the majority of the population still get their information mostly from TV, turns out obviously that the youth, they get information on Palestine primarily on social media first. So obviously that changes the dynamic because, this is the first genocide that is live streamed on social media by its victims and also by its perpetrators. Like you see the Israeli army doing TikTok videos with their crimes against humanity. So I think what's really important is that generational, element. But what the polls also show is that actually, even if they're, as you say, instinctively supportive, they're not well informed. Yeah. Because the majority of the polls, what it shows is either people don't know and they don't want to express an opinion, or they actually say that they don't know enough. So our role in the Palestinian movement to defend our rights is to be able to inform people. And it's not for the lack of content or for the lack, again, of things out there. We've seen, right, that I think Palestine has been brought back on the international map and mainstream in the past month. It doesn't necessarily mean that people feel better informed because they either don't trust the media or there is like news headlines and they're confused by what they're seeing, or they're just seeing suffering and suffering and suffering. That doesn't help them to contextualize. Right. So our role and the role of, obviously a lot of our partners is, as you say, contextualize and make people realize actually the Palestinians, this didn't start October 7. Yeah. We are colonized people. The sort of the colonial Israeli project has been steady over the past century, Zionist and Israeli, and it has had several components: ethnic cleansing, apartheid, occupation. These are different systems that they've put in place for the same purpose all along, which is expelling us from our homeland, whether it's by killing us or, isolating us from each other, or just, kicking us out. So I think that's important to understand, because that's where a lot of investment also needs to be done, which is that grassroots, that people who are with you, who have their heart somehow in the right place. To have your heart in the right place and then to take the right type of action and actually go, to mobilize and organize, there is that long way where you need to really invest in.
In education, I guess, yeah. So how does advocating in the global south differ from the West?
So you have obviously that element, because a lot of in those countries, I think what's been happening is there is also much less Palestinian presence. So we right. Palestinians, we have a lot of our diaspora, people in exile that are in the Arab world, in Europe, in the United States. And I think the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian, former leadership and so on, they've always invested a lot in their relationship with the West. Because the West gives money, they have the power, the US decides, they are the biggest obstacle. That remains true. They
Yeah.
are like the major player.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you pressure the US, right? And that's where enters into place, like how can you shame the US, isolate the US and Israel, which are kind of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, for sure.
Israel is supported by the US in this. So in the global south, you need to get more friendly governments to take really further actions and detach themselves from either following the US policy or to kind of be fearing the US hegemony, and also building their own alliances and power structures to pressure externally. And it's a population that's less informed. So often they just, we just need to invest also in them understanding better the context and the
Yeah.
situation, and hearing from Palestinians.
Yeah.
Again, because the presence is less, active. And that doesn't mean there's no diaspora. So we are investing also in countries where we can, we're a smaller organization, but we have a movement in the making in many places because of the Palestinian communities that exist there.
Sure.
So I think part of our strengths, we always say it's our people. We're 14 million, and only 7 are in Palestine. So I think we need to remember that. I think we need to invest in that, because our movement, will not be complete if we don't include the refugees and, people in the diaspora.
So what are the conditions under which you operate here on the West Bank? Because you're obviously a human rights organization, an advocacy organization talking about Palestinian rights. You yourself, this organization is also under occupation. In a way, sometimes you'd kind of be reporting about your own situation. So what kind of challenges do you face in terms of the Israeli occupation in your sort of day-to-day work here?
Yeah. So first, we're not a human rights organization per se. I like to make the distinction because I think there is great human rights organizations. Our scope is wider. I think our struggle is a political one. I don't think it's only about human rights. And I think we need to be able to go all the way if we want to decolonize, to speak about our entire spectrum of rights, self-determination and collective and national rights, stuff that might not necessarily be strictly included in the human rights scope. So I think it's important to talk about that. I think look, many of the Palestinian organizations, we have to operate in many different ways in order to survive. And ours is the fact that our audience is internationally.
Yeah.
It's international, it's outside.
Is it mainly international, your audience?
Yeah, because our mandate is really about building that international power for Palestine. So, which means that from, we're kind of under the radar locally, and we're trying to maintain some of that this way.
Yeah.
It also means that we need to be taking just security measures that are not necessarily significant, but our team is not on the website. I'm not on the website. At some point I went out of Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore.
Is this because of sort of fear of repercussions?
Yeah, because of my local situation. Yeah. So it's like there are compromises we need to do.
Yeah.
And same with the PA. Like we are. Look, we don't have it's not a confrontation, but it's also keeping cordial distance. I think again, operating in a way that maintains our ability to operate. And I think just being professional also helps, making sure we kind of do things by the book when needed, but also hiding in the open is the philosophy. Sometimes we overestimate some of the and I think, look, for example, personally, I have privileges, which means I have a foreign passport. Some of our staff are the same, like they're like sort of, some are based outside because they cannot even enter.
Right.
So that's not even an option. Like our remote operations also is because some of our staff cannot even come. But also others have foreign passports. And I know that for a lot of activists and a lot of spokespeople, that's a layer of protection. Because, if I'm jailed tomorrow, it will be less easy for them to keep me.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it's a privilege we need to be using wisely, but I think we need to be aware of that.
So obviously there's a genocide taking place in Gaza. As you mentioned, it's a lot of people are saying that this is worse than the Nakba of 1948, 47 and 48. At the same time, we're seeing Palestine has been put back on the international map. I mean, I would say it's pretty much top of mind for anyone interested in politics in general. It's quite hard to ignore. Do you think that there's, can you speak about the kind of momentum we're in right now, and if we can talk about sort of taking advantage of that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's always difficult to kind of talk about, silver lining or taking advantage, because I think the sacrifice is really too high.
Absolutely. That's what I'm getting at.
And I think that's what really needs to end. I don't think we can say, this needs to continue for visibility. That's
Of course
I've
not.
heard people say that in the,
That's
in the
insane.
back. It's terrible. But I do think it's our responsibility to make sure that the 40,000 martyrs and the more than 20,000 orphans, they haven't sacrificed for nothing. So we cannot go back to October 6th, which is a big risk. It is a risk that is here. Western diplomacies and chancelleries and governments, they're resurfacing the two-state solution and the Middle East peace process. Very empty sort of mantras and sort of slogans that have zero meaning on the ground. Like,
Completely.
our people is being exterminated. There is a genocide. And you talk to me, really, I was told by diplomats, I think we're closer than ever to the two-state solution, to a state of Palestine.
I mean,
while our people, where Gaza is being completely destroyed. Yeah. So I think we need to push back against that, because I think that we've seen, in a way, we haven't seen the situation now, but politically we've seen that before, where you would have in 2009 and 2014 terrible bombings on Gaza, and also 2021 with uprising. And every time we're we cannot go, we must move forward. We must reframe. Yeah. We must, the struggle must center our rights from the river to the sea, and we must liberate ourselves. And I think make that understand politically, right? What does that mean? And I think that every time I think the Israeli regime is really kind of putting all of its power into making sure that they create new facts on the ground that are normalized. And then we're kind of discussing, negotiating just where we were, just a step again, they create more settlements, and then it's about removing that outpost. They destroy Gaza, and now we're going to talk about reconstructing Gaza, not ending the siege and not liberating Palestine.
Yeah.
And I think that's the danger, that all of the efforts will go to, let's go back to October 6th, to what they call calm and peace, but actually it's just more violence against Palestinians.
Yeah.
So I think that's really our responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. And we have that moment. I think we cannot let that go, because it will be, it's existential, I think, for our people now, and our struggle. So it's about changing that software, changing the fact that you cannot talk about peace negotiations that has no meaning. It's also so counterproductive and absolutely disconnected from the power dynamics. You have a regime that is a nuclear power, that has the support of the biggest power out there in the world, and you're telling Palestinians to go and around the table and negotiate. I mean, what do we have to negotiate? We already lost everything, and not everything, but like too much. So I think it's about reframing that in the sense of like the people, if they want really to support us, the first thing they need to support is dismantling the settler colonial power and apartheid. Yeah.
I've taken up a lot of your time. I'm very grateful for it. But before you go, I'd like to ask you what is your take on the state of Israel as of this moment? How's it going for them?
I think they made many mistakes, actually. I do think they ride on a very, unfortunately, still very strong Western support.
Mm-hmm.
That is based on different things, right? Historical guilt, inability to even look at their colonial past themselves, and so on. Islamophobia, all of that. But also, I think that's the moment we are in where I think the cracks are here. This moment has really pushed some of the cracks, and we need to widen those cracks. In showing, for example, how I think the myth that Israel is a democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, all of that is really crumbling, has crumbled. But it's not, we shouldn't take that for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we need to continue pushing.
Yeah.
We need to continue to show that their entire project is based on racism, right? We need to continue to show that they're just lying, that the entire regime is based on lies and deceits and using all kinds of tactics to maintain this racist system in place.
Yeah.
And I think we have that moment. I don't think the change will come first from Israeli society. Okay. I think a lot of people ask us, why don't you talk to, why don't you actually address Israeli society?
Yeah.
I don't think that the change will come first from there. I think no group in power has relinquished their privilege and power just simply willingly. Black people had to fight against white people in the US and in South Africa to end the at least legal discrimination and so on. The white people were not like, oh yes, sure, okay, I understand you now. It was because there was a power confrontation. The same with men and women. Women didn't get the right to vote, or I don't know, the right to be independent and open a bank account just because men suddenly woke up one day and like, I know you're right. I listen to you now. Didn't happen like that. At least not as a
collective.
They had to struggle. They had to fight. They had to go in the street. They had to, create barricades and all of that. They had to revolution.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to understand that. In order to understand that the change will not first happen from a shift in the Israeli society that will wake up and suddenly realize that they are a racist system.
Yeah. Well, Ines Abdelrazak, co-director of the Palestinian Institute for Public Diplomacy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today at Kalam Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.